Truck 17, Cabot County Dispatch. Trans Truck 17 and engine 11 are on scene.
14 and 17 and 11.
Is on scene. All Can-Am units go to channel 4.
Well, my name is Mike Wilson. I'm with the National Park Service. I'm a fire communication education specialist and work here in the Santa Monica Mountains. And I had an opportunity to talk with Mr. Thompson and set up a site visit down here at his property and take a look at what's going on with fire safety and what Mr. Thompson been doing with his property to keep the fire safe. And we've talked about a few items such as defensible space and from the house out. And we just wanted to take this opportunity to walk around the property and kind of point out some things that are looking really good and maybe some areas that could use some improvement as it comes to fire safety in the event of a wildfire coming down Zuma Canyon here where we're at. The first thing we actually looked at was the structure itself, and noticed that on the slope side you are doing some great retrofitting with hardy backing board and taking a look at the building material and the building construction. And obviously this side is wood siding, which could be definitely retrofitted into the hardy backer board that you're already continuing to do with your house, which would be great to continue with that around this side of the house. After the structure itself, we started looking at some of the landscaping, and since you are on a steep slope, took a look at what's downslope from your house. You'll notice you have the goats and sheep, which are doing, looks like a really good job keeping the fuel loading down to a minimal without removing too much, which would create soil erosion. But you are breaking up the continuous fuels and limbing up some of your pepper trees here, which is really good, because what you don't want to have is your surface fuels creating what's called ladder fuels up into the canopies of these trees, which will allow fire to spread. So this almost looks a little bit like a shaded fuel break where you limb up the lower branches underneath, which will prevent the fire that is maybe spreading on the ground. It'll prevent it from getting up into the canopies of the trees. So this really looks really good right here, the work that you've done here. The hardy backer board, which is really good stuff. You can paint it and make it look pretty much like whatever you want, but it is very resistant to fire and also really good against termites. Creates a good barrier instead of the actual wood siding itself. And there is vents that are made in different shapes and sizes that do have either a honeycomb type material inside of them or a baffling system inside of them that will prevent embers. That's the big thing you want to look at when you're looking at the structure itself. I am a wildland fire person, not necessarily a structure person, but what I can talk to at the structure side of things, any place that ember can get in, it's going to find its way, and vents are one of the more common places. This size meshing here, embers could very easily get in there and potentially ignite whatever that may be susceptible to burning underneath there. So there are vents that could be easily used here to replace that would prevent embers from getting in. The embers that are broadcasted out a quarter of a mile, half mile, 3/4 of a mile in this fuel type in the chaparral ecosystem, those embers can carry out in front of the main fire and then land and shower down on communities, and whatever they may land on, if it's susceptible, they can start a spot fire. That's what we're really wanting to educate the communities on and the homeowners on is taking a look at your property and what you can do to your structure to really harden it up and prevent those embers from getting in, or prevent the embers from landing in vegetation that's right close to your house and some of your ornamental landscaping and starting a fire right next to your structure, which would then lead to potentially burning your structure down. So this is some of the vent material that we were talking about that could be used to replace some of the vents that we see on here on your structure. This one here is kind of a honeycomb style vent. This would be the exterior. This would be facing inside. And what happens here is the embers pass through this side here, and it's like a baffle system, and they'll rattle around and actually knock the heat out of the embers, and they'll actually fall down away from your structure. And that's one type of vent here. This is another type. This is a honeycomb type of vent here. The way this one works is this is the outside. Any type of heat source, whether it's radiant heat or an ember, touches this honeycomb material, it just basically collapses upon itself and seals it. and doesn't allow any more embers to pass through. And then when the fire goes through, you just take out this piece, cut a new piece, and put it in there, and you're all set to go again. So those are the two different types of vents that's available. The big thing about these is making sure that they have the California State Fire Marshal stamp of approval, and you'll find those on these types of vents. So here we got is the Hardybacker board, which Mr. Thompson is doing some of his house already with, which is really good. It's kind of a cement material. You can paint it and stain it to make it look like wood. Very resistant to fire and also termites. So good material here to use if you're thinking about retrofitting some of the siding on your house. So what we have here is a rain gutter, and this material here is can be used to insert inside of your rain gutter to prevent leaves and debris from building up. But it allows the water to still percolate through and flow through the rain gutter. And also this, it may look like it's flammable, but when you touch a match or any type of heat source to it, it doesn't burn. It surprisingly, it just crumbles a little bit, but does not ignite. And so this is a good option for your rain gutters. Another important thing to think about around your property is proper signage. What this here is letting the firefighters know that there's a swimming pool on the property. And so this placard, this sign put out at the end of the driveway would be a real good visual for the firefighters coming in, that they know that there's a potential water source here. And along with swimming pools, if you can, have them plumbed to where the firefighters can actually draft water out of them on the street, have the piping out to the street where they can tap into that source and not necessarily have to back in and draft out of the pool itself. That'll just a lot more easy access. A lot of the new pools now are going in with that option with the standpipe at the street level to be able to draw the water from the pool for the firefighters. What we got here is this kind of an older construction style structure with pretty much all wood shake shingled roof. So this is something that if you're looking at putting some money in to retrofit or remodel, using those materials that we mentioned, the Hardybacker board, you could completely redo a lot of that with that material and still go with the wood look. But this is something that you'd want to take a good look at and replace the wood shake shingled roofs. There's composite material out there that or tile or concrete that looks like wood shake, but it's actually a Class A fire rating roof, either tile, composite, or concrete. So that would be something to consider with this structure here. Right behind us here we have another structure that actually has what I was mentioning earlier, more of the concrete tile roofing material, which is designed to look like almost like a wood shake roof or a wood roof, but it's actually either tile or cement based, and it is give it the Class A fire rating. So you can kind of still go for the look of kind of a wood shake older look without compromising the structure and having the good material in place. And just like anything, you want to make sure your rain gutters are cleaned and swept out and free of debris. Sweeping off the roof, sweeping off any pine needles or debris that may be on the roof, even though that's a composite or a tile cement roof, still the material that's sitting on there could be susceptible to embers landing on there and starting fires. So that's just something, just your routine maintenance, taking a look at your roof and sweeping it off of any debris or any material that may be building up on it. When we're talking about the term house out, is taking a look at your structure and what you can do to harden it. And again, we've talked about the embers that are going to be potentially showering down from a fire that could be anywhere from a quarter to a half a mile away from here, and looking at where those embers are going to be landing and any places where they might be able to get in. We talked about the vents, the eaves, the siding itself, then also the landscaping around your house. What you can do landscaping wise to make sure when those embers are coming down, they're not landing on receptive material that's going to burn. So whether it's the best thing is keeping all vegetation at least 3 to 5 feet away from the side of the house, almost wanting to look like or act like an ashtray around the footprint of your house. So embers land right next to your house, they're not going to light anything that's going to cause a fire to start and get up underneath the siding towards the bottom of your foundation. And making sure those embers, again, don't start in a receptive fuel bed. So keeping that vegetation away from the house. The low grasses and stuff is okay, as long as it's irrigated and kept well maintained, 2 to 3 inches. And as you work away out from the structure, just thinking about breaking up the continuity of the fuel, of the vegetation, so both horizontally and vertically. And so what you want to make sure is you don't have a lot of vegetation all connected, acting almost like a fuse or a thread right to your structure, breaking up that horizontal continuity, and also the vertical continuity. We talked a little bit about it in the back with the pepper trees, trimming up your shrubbery and your trees. So if there is a surface fire here close to your structure, it's not going to get up into the canopies of the shrubs or the trees and burn more actively and cause more radiant heat and flame impingement onto your house. So keeping the surface fire down to a bare minimum, because when the firefighters come in, they're going to take a look at your property and see if it's defensible. And one of the things they're going to look at is your landscaping, the construction of your house, and is it something that they can come in and with minimal or no work safely stay here and defend the property. And a lot of that has to do with the building material, breaking up that continuity, like I mentioned, the horizontal or vertical continuity in the fuels, and just making sure that's all nicely kept, either irrigated or trimmed up to where it can't spread continuously across. So looking at what's around your house that may be burnable. Here, a surfboard that's maybe been here for a while. It's got some leaf litter and some burnable debris kind of built up around it. So that'd be something, again, this is a very easy fix. No cost, just a little bit of labor to move it away. And so, again, anything homeowners can do to improve their property and make it more fire safe, it can start out with the very simple things like moving burnable material like this away from the house, making sure you don't have a wood pile stored next to your house. The simple things that don't really cost anything, but that you can do that'll go a long way to keep your house fire safe. So some other items around your house that you could take a look at that are flammable and could be receptive to those little embers that are going to be coming down potentially all around your house are these little wicker mats. They are flammable. Those potentially could ignite and start on fire, depending on what they're next to. Could end up starting some of your wood siding or underneath your door. Could end up leading to a problem just as simple as replacing that with something that's not burnable. We're looking at some more venting material, and this would be a place here where you, if you want to do a retrofit, you may be able to put some of those newer style vents that we talked about earlier in place here, which would definitely go a long ways for preventing embers from getting inside. And as we move along, we're looking at the wood siding and the overhang of the deck right here. And again, this would be something that you may want to, in a retrofit, go with the hardy backer board and match that look that you're going with on the side of the house, which would serve two purposes. It would match what you already have going on, plus it would be much more safer for fire. And so that'd be an option, because embers will come up the slope from below your house and funnel up underneath this deck. And so whatever you can do to make that the most fire safe underneath this deck would be very good. So whether it's hardy backer or even closing it in, that may be another option. The bottom of this deck, close it in with some hardy back material. And not even have a space for embers to get up underneath there. The slope that you do have, there will be some convective and radiant heat coming up from down below, but like we talked about earlier, there's some good defensible space in action with the goats and sheep, which is definitely going to create a good buffer for you. When the fire does maybe potentially come up this slope, it's going to hit this much lower fuel and be more of a surface fire, which is much more manageable for the firefighters to knock down than the higher vegetation. So here we have a good example of how you can trim a tree on your property, and just again, like I mentioned, breaking up that vertical continuity. Notice there's no fuel or vegetation underneath it, and even if there was low-lying vegetation, this is trimmed up really good, and it's broken up that continuity, and it's taken out a lot of the fuel loading in the tree. So there's just not as much mass there anymore to catch fire. And so that's a really good example of how you can keep a tree for some shade, but reduce some of the fuel loading that's in it. So we're looking down the slope below the structure here, and one of the things I just wanted to mention that as we noticed on the property line, there's really good weed abatement done and fuel loading reduction that's done here to create a defensible space with the goats and the sheep. And as you go across the property line, you see a little bit more fuel type, but even that there is pretty well broken up. You can see the higher shrubs and the lower vegetation. And again, that there is really keeping that slope intact, preventing soil erosion, which is really important. And the one thing that, one message we also want to get across too is just doing a complete clear cut out 100, 200, 300 feet or whatever it may be away from a structure is not necessarily the best tactic used. It could be that you want to thin things out starting from the, you don't necessarily have to have 100 foot, 200 foot, 300 foot actual clear cut that denudes all of the vegetation, because especially on a slope like this, we want to keep some vegetation in place to keep soil erosion from happening. But you want to more thin it as you start from the structure, move from the house out, and thin it as you go. And as you get farther away from the structure, leaving a little bit more, but still breaking up that horizontal and vertical continuity, still creating that really good defensible space. Because what will happen is the embers, like I mentioned before, can spot a quarter mile, half a mile away. You don't necessarily have to clear cut 100, 200, 300 feet away from your structure, especially on a slope such as this, because it is steep. You want to and need to keep vegetation on the slope to prevent soil erosion. But what you want to do is more thin it as you move away from the structure, break up that horizontal and vertical continuity of the fuel, and so you're still allowing for the soil to stay intact and the hillside to stay intact, but yet still removing some of the vegetation to reduce the fuel loading, but not necessarily a clear cut, especially on a slope this steep, but just thinning it out as you start from the structure, from the house, and work outwards. And as the farther you get away, the less you have to kind of thin out and break up that continuity as the farther away you get from the structure. Here we walked around the property and looked at a few things, and some of the terms that we talked about were defensible space, what you can do to make your home the most fire safe, the structural integrity of the house itself and the construction material, looking at the house and working out towards the vegetation, your landscaping, and breaking up the continuity both horizontally and vertically, thinking about where all those embers are going to land on your property and what you can do looking at from the house out to make that house the most survivable in a wildfire coming down through these canyons. Go ahead and both Los Angeles County Fire Department and the National Park Service here in the Santa Monica Mountains. We have websites. You can check out some more information on there, and also the fire safe councils in the area as well have some good information.